from orthodox American theory about interest politics, where, of course, the expectation was that with development, Brazil should have had a pluralist interest group system, and it didn't have a pluralist interest group system. It had an interest group system configured quite differently, and that, of course, led me to corporatism, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, only later did I discover that what I thought was a Southern invention, namely dependency theory, was not. Dependency theory actually came from Romania, believe it or not, and also from the German Listian school of political economy. Namely, the concept of center and periphery, the consequences of being on the periphery. In this case, the periphery was Eastern Europe, but Southeastern Europe, and the central mechanism which they postulated, both in the Latin American version and in the earlier Romanian version, namely the systematic tendency for a deterioration in the terms of trade between manufactured goods and raw materials. Right? That was supposed to be the main exploiting mechanism that would sustain the underdevelopment, or at least sustain the differences between the two areas. So it was really southeastern, and then was recycled through the economic commission for Latin America by, incidentally, a number of refugees from Romania, Poland, and Eastern Europe who were among the founders of CEPAL, and then it reemerged as a southern alternative conception of how the world system affected internal politics. Then I discovered corporatism in a used bookstore in Rio de Janeiro, and in the writings. I mean, once I had discovered it, then I started reading lots of things by Brazilians during the 1930s. And this was, of course, central to my understanding of the peculiarities, let's say, that Brazil could develop even at a very rapid rate under a dictatorship, but even earlier for a brief period as a democracy, and sustain and even extend a system of corporatist interest representation, the central piece of which was the so-called Consolidação das Leis do Trabalho, which is practically a copy of Mussolini, right? But it still was there, and it was still functioning. In fact, I think it's still there now. I don't think it has been abrogated, no? A Consolidação is still around. I wasn't quite sure. But what I did then was take what seemed to be, this, again, a concept which emerged largely, at least in modern times, in Southern Europe and closely associated with Mussolini, although actually much of the thinking about corporatism was also from Central and Eastern Europe, but that Mussolini would tie into it, came to Latin America, and then I brought it back to Europe, so to speak, by making this distinction between state corporatism and societal corporatism. But just to show you the price you pay, I can't tell you how many angry letters and negative reviews I got from scholars, especially in Northern Europe, when I described their political systems as having corporatist interest systems. And so I got Swedes, Danes, Norwegians, Austrians, and Dutch all complained that I was accusing them of being fascist by pointing out that their interest group systems was quite distinctive from the one that one anticipated, at least in the pluralist literature. So you can move these concepts around from place to place, but there would at least be an initial price that was paid. Although I have to say now that the label of corporatist has become quite acceptable, even in Sweden and Scandinavia. In fact, it's used very frequently by Swedes and Scandinavians, although they usually stick a prefix, neo, in front of it, or they stick societal or liberal or whatever it is, just to make it sound softer than the Mussolinian variety. Finally, and most importantly, came the study of democratization. The northern and southern literatures were preoccupied, particularly in this post-World War II period, in the light also, obviously, of the experiences of the interwar period, with the stability of already existing democracies. And research into how these democracies became democratic was largely left to the particularizing dispositions of historians working on individual countries. To the extent that there was a model of democratization out there in the literature, it began with the preface that you should take at least 100 to 150 years to do it, and that it was best to do it British style by inserting gradual sequential reforms and making sure that you kept 20 or 30 years between each successive reform, and you would extend then both rights to contestation and to inclusion in citizenship over this lengthy period. That was, so to speak, the way you did it, by far the best. And those countries which were unfortunate enough not to have done it in this gradual way, France, Italy, right, in particular, were regarded as somehow intrinsically unstable. If you look at the work of Malman and other people like that, they always classified Germany and Italy as unstable and, of course, inferior democracies because they didn't do it in the nice, gradual northern British and northern European way. Now, I did not work on democracies initially. In fact, I came to Brazil to work on an autocracy, a military dictatorship, and I kept up with autocracies. That's why I went to Spain and Portugal especially. And then, of course, I got surprised by the Portuguese Revolution. I should say, delighted by the Portuguese Revolution, and suddenly found myself with this topic of democratization. And I couldn't find anything. Got together with Guillermo O'Donnell to put together a working group, the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I didn't have anything to go on. I mean, there was literally no literature on democratization, right, other than the histories of individual countries. And then I found one article, which is a wonderful example of moving around the points of the compass. It was an article by Dankwart Rustow, who was a German refugee who had lived in Turkey and done his initial research on Turkey. Then he went to Sweden, so he went from the east, I guess you could call it, to the north, and then ended up, of course, teaching in the United States. And he was the only one who came up with an unorthodox conception of democratization, because the main idea was democratization required prerequisites. Somebody once listed 11 of them, right? And obviously economic development was one, but civic culture, and there's a whole long list, right? Whereas Rostow said, no, you could make democracy out of all kinds of material, provided actors behaved in a certain way. Now, he didn't have a complete theory of this, but he had this nucleus that I think I found very, very interesting. And it came out of exactly this movement around from different perspectives. How he got these ideas, I don't know. Presumably some kind of weird synthesis between Turkey and Sweden, I guess. Now, when Guillermo and I were asked to put together this working group, we absolutely, without even thinking about it, we didn't consider this innovative. We just decided to make sure that it was a comparison between Southern Europe and Latin America. I'm now told nobody had done that before, but we didn't even think about it. It just seemed very obvious that that was the thing to do. And I'm convinced that the success of that project is based or is dependent upon its interregional, let's call it Southern Europe, Southern America, or Southwest, or whatever it is, nature. Because I think that forced us to think generically about the problem, because we could see a much wider range of variation than we would have seen if we had stayed only in the South, or only in the South of Europe, or the South of Latin America, so to speak.